Rome, the eternal city, sleeps beneath a sky of molten gold and shadow. Torches flicker against marble walls, painting restless shapes across the empire that once called itself divine. But tonight, divinity hides behind locked doors. Somewhere within the Palatine Hill, in a palace built from conquest and sin, a whisper stirs, one that will never be spoken aloud again. They say the Empress summoned 20 men that night, soldiers, nobles, even slaves, each chosen not for rank or blood, but for something far more primitive. The corridors trembled with the echo of sandals and suppressed breath. Outside, the city remained unaware, wrapped in the illusion of order and empire. But inside, behind veiled chambers and silken walls, history shifted from marble to flesh. Rome loved to believe its rulers were gods. Their portraits were worshipped, their words carved into stone. Yet no empire gilded itself in virtue as feverishly as Rome, and none rotted so quietly beneath the surface. Power here was not just measured in armies or decrees. It was measured in desire, the ability to command both obedience and surrender. And tonight, its most powerful woman would test the limits of both. She was no ordinary empress. To the public, she was a goddess of grace, her image paraded through temples, her beauty sung by poets. But to those within her palace, she was a storm contained within silk. Every glance, every pause, carried the weight of something forbidden. As midnight deepened, the torches outside her chambers burned lower, their flames bending as if in reverence or warning. Servants vanished into silence, guards were dismissed, and a heavy scent of myrrh thickened the air. Behind carved ivory doors, Rome's empress prepared to defy the gods themselves. Some claimed it was madness, others vengeance, but perhaps it was something colder. A hunger for control in a world ruled by men who saw women as trophies, never players. For one night, she would rewrite the rules, not with ink or blood, but with her own body as the empire's most dangerous weapon. And yet, for all its grandeur, this night would vanish. No historian dared record it. No monument dared remember. Only faint whispers would remain, drifting through time like smoke. Whispers of the night when Rome's goddess became its greatest sin. What happened in that chamber was never meant to be remembered. By daylight, Rome gleamed like a promise. Columns kissed the sun, fountains sang, and marble gods stared down upon the faithful, unblinking, perfect, eternal. The empire called itself pure, ordained by heaven, and at its center stood the imperial family, the living embodiment of virtue. To the masses, they were more than rulers. They were celestial beings in human form, chosen to uphold order in a world of chaos. But marble, no matter how polished, always hides its cracks. Behind the ceremonies and golden laurel crowns, Rome's heart beat to a different rhythm, one of indulgence, secrecy, and addiction. Banquets stretched until dawn, dripping with wine, flesh, and forbidden laughter. Courtiers traded favors in shadowed corridors, while priests preached restraint before crowds. To the empire, pleasure wasn't sin, it was theater, a display of control. Every gesture in the imperial court was choreographed. The tilt of a head, the whisper of silk, the glance that lasted 1 second too long. The palace itself was a stage where purity was performed, not practiced. The public saw piety, the private halls knew only hunger. And nowhere was that hunger more dangerous than within the palace of the Empress. To outsiders, her chambers were temples of serenity, draped in ivory curtains, perfumed with rose oil, lit by 1,000 candles. But step closer, and the air trembled with something electric, something alive. Courtiers called it allure, philosophers called it corruption. The truth was simpler. Power itself had taken a human form, and it was a woman. In Rome, dominance was an art, and desire its most fluent language. Senators boasted of their conquests not in words, but in who bowed before them. Generals returned from war to find greater battles awaiting them in bedrooms than on battlefields. And through it all, the Empress watched, learning how lust shaped loyalty, how submission could command more than fear ever could. She understood what few dared admit. In Rome, virtue was a costume, and pleasure was power dressed in disguise. Every kiss, every affair, every stolen night was a transaction, a promise or a threat. To control desire was to control men. To deny it was to be ruled by them. As priests praised chastity before the altar, the same nobles who nodded in agreement spent their nights drowning in excess. Statues of gods looked on, their marble eyes unjudging, their lips forever silent. Rome's grandeur wasn't built on morality, it was built on performance. And behind that performance stood one woman who mastered it completely. She smiled like an angel, spoke like a queen, and sinned like a god. But no one deceived Rome like its own empress. A woman born not to serve, but to rule through sin. She was not born into power, she carved her way toward it. The daughter of an ambitious senator and a mother whispered to have noble Greek blood. She learned early that Rome was not kind to beauty without purpose. In the marble halls where men spoke of destiny, she discovered that destiny belonged only to those who took it. Even as a girl, her silence was mistaken for obedience, her poise for innocence. Both were weapons she would one day wield to perfection. When she entered the imperial court, she dazzled them all. Not with words, but with restraint, the kind that made men imagine what she never said. The poets compared her to Venus. The matrons in private called her dangerous. And when the emperor noticed her, it was less a romance than a transaction. He saw in her the perfect emblem, beauty that could calm the crowds, grace that could sanctify his rule. Their marriage was sealed beneath the gaze of Jupiter, but no god could disguise the truth. It was a union of politics, not love. He ruled an empire. She learned to rule him. While he waged wars beyond the Tiber, she studied the art of influence, mastering the smiles that disarmed senators, the glances that redirected decisions. Rome had seen women like her before. Messalina, who turned lust into rebellion, Julia, whose freedom cost her exile, Agrippina, who mothered an emperor and then destroyed him. But this empress was their reflection, refined, colder, cleverer, patient enough to wait for the moment the empire itself would kneel. Behind her flawless image lay a mind sharpened by humiliation. She knew her worth was measured in youth and obedience, commodities destined to fade. So she turned her fragility into a mirror for the men who sought to control her, letting them see only what they wished to believe. Beneath the silks and jewels burned a suppressed fury, born of years spent as an ornament in a cage of marble. Every feast, every procession, every forced smile tightened the chain around her spirit, until rebellion became not an act of defiance, but of survival. She studied power the way others studied scripture, tracing its patterns, memorizing its sins. And when the emperor took lovers of his own, flaunting them before the court, she did not cry. She watched. She remembered. Because she understood something her husband never did, that silence could be more dangerous than any army. To Rome, she was a vision of divine femininity. But beneath the perfume and pearls, she was building a kingdom of her own. One born not from conquest, but from vengeance disguised as grace. And one night, that quiet rage would awaken, transforming the Empress of Rome into its most forbidden legend. Midnight in Rome. The city lies cloaked in silence, its marble streets glistening under a reluctant moon. Inside the imperial palace, torches burn low, their flames shivering against walls gilded with scenes of conquest. Yet tonight, the only battle to be fought will happen behind a single set of locked doors. The Empress stands before a mirror of polished bronze. Her reflection stares back, serene, deliberate, almost divine. She moves with the calm certainty of a priestess performing a sacred rite. Every gesture is intentional. The drape of silk, the scent of myrrh that lingers like prophecy, the faint sound of sandals retreating as her attendants are dismissed one by one. Even the guards outside the chamber are replaced with silence. Tonight, there will be no witnesses. Word had already spread through the inner court. A secret invitation, an imperial command. 20 men summoned to the Empress's private chamber. Soldiers hardened by war, nobles spoiled by luxury, slaves accustomed to obedience. Each of them chosen, though none could say why. Their steps echoed through the marble corridors like distant drums, unsure whether they marched toward desire or judgment. Inside, the air feels suspended, too thick to breathe. The Empress waits, not as a lover, but as a sovereign. Her face betrays no tremor, no hesitation. To her, this is not indulgence. It is reclamation. Every act that follows will be her language of revolt, against the emperor who flaunted his mistresses, against the Senate that mocked her silence, against the gods who decreed her a vessel, never a voice. When the first man enters, he kneels as if before an altar. The torchlight turns his shadow long and trembling across the marble floor. The Empress regards him not with affection, but with the steady gaze of judgment. What happens between them is not lust. It is ceremony. With each passing moment, the boundaries that Rome built between ruler and ruled, master and servant, begin to dissolve. As the hours unfold, the palace becomes a theatre of contrasts. Outside, marble statues stand frozen in their perfection, cold witnesses to the heat of rebellion. The night deepens, measured not by time but by the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The Empress remains composed, her control absolute. Each man leaves not triumphant, but humbled, as though they have glimpsed something greater than desire. A woman wielding her own myth. What begins as forbidden pleasure transforms into something elemental. This is not seduction, it is sovereignty. The Empress is no longer Rome's ornament. She is its mirror. Through her defiance, she exposes the hypocrisy that gilded every temple, every law, every vow of purity uttered by men who sinned in secret. By the 10th hour, the moon has lowered beyond the palace walls. The final man departs in silence, his steps unsteady, his eyes unable to meet hers. The chamber reeks of incense and power, a scent that will haunt the corridors for generations. The Empress stands alone once more, untouched by regret, radiant in her stillness. Outside, dawn creeps over the Tiber. Rome will wake to the same rituals, the same lies. But within these walls, something irreversible has happened. A goddess has fallen, and a woman, fierce, defiant, and unrepentant, has risen in her place. By dawn, the Empress had broken every law, and birthed a legend Rome dared never write. Dawn broke over Rome like a guilty secret. The sun rose too gently, as if afraid to look upon what the night had done. Inside the palace, the air hung heavy, perfumed but poisoned. Servants who had seen too much were gone by sunrise, dismissed quietly or never seen again. The marble floors were scrubbed until they gleamed, yet something invisible lingered. A tremor, a scent, a memory that refused to die. The Empress moved through the corridors as though nothing had changed. Draped in white, serene and untouchable, she greeted her attendants with the same grace that once charmed an empire. But beyond those calm eyes, she sensed it. The shifting air, the silent stares, the way conversations stopped a second too soon when she entered a room. Rome was whispering. The first rumors came from the servants' quarters, passed in half-breaths over water basins and bread crusts. Then the guards spoke of strange dismissals, of shadows moving through torchlight. Within days, the Senate knew. Within weeks, the entire court trembled. No one dared say her name aloud, but everyone knew the story. The Empress who had summoned 20 men to her chamber. To some, it was madness. To others, blasphemy. To a few, an act of terrifying courage. But to the Emperor and his advisors, it was far more dangerous. A threat to the Empire's illusion of perfection. Rome could withstand wars, rebellions, even plagues. But scandal could erode divinity. If the Empress, their living goddess, could indulge in mortal hunger, what did that say of Rome itself? Behind closed doors, senators debated her fate in tones barely above a whisper. Some demanded her exile, others her death, but none could decide how to punish what they dared not confirm. After all, to acknowledge the rumor was to make it real, and so silence became their weapon. Poets began to write in riddles, cloaking the tale in myth. They spoke of a moonlit goddess who devoured the pride of 20 men, of a queen whose night of pleasure turned marble to dust. The words spread like perfume through the taverns, carried on lips that both feared and adored her. Even slaves, forbidden to speak her name, carved symbols into walls, a torch, a veil, a crown, silent tributes to the woman who defied the gods. Through it all, the Empress remained composed. Her smile never faltered. She walked among her accusers like a phantom dressed in grace. But beneath the calm, she felt it. The empire tightening its grip, the invisible net of judgment closing around her. For the first time, the Empress realized power could destroy, not through swords, but through whispers. At first, Rome said nothing. No decrees, no accusations, no trials. The Emperor appeared beside his wife in public ceremonies, their hands touching like actors reciting a line from a dying play. The crowds cheered, believing the empire unshaken. But behind the marble smiles, decisions were already being made, not of justice, but of erasure. The Senate gathered in private, their voices low, their faces pale with fear. To condemn the Empress openly would risk exposing what had been done. Yet to let her live freely was to let the empire rot from within. The solution was not punishment, it was silence. The act would be buried, her name dissolved into the shadows between history and myth. Rome would forget her, not by accident, but by design. So began the ritual of obliteration. Artists were summoned at night to scrape her face from frescoes. Chisels struck marble, cutting through her likeness on statues that once adorned temples. Inscriptions bearing her name were smoothed until the stone itself seemed ashamed to remember. Portraits were melted into molten bronze, recast into the shape of obedient goddesses with no past and no sin. Even coins that bore her image were recalled and reissued, her profile replaced by faceless divinity. The people noticed, but no one spoke. It was safer not to. The streets of Rome were littered with memory's ashes, fragments of a woman who had been too visible, too alive. The emperor never spoke her name again. Some claimed he banished her to a distant villa, surrounded by gardens that bloomed but never bore fruit. Others whispered that she died quietly, her body entombed without title or inscription. But her true death came not with the blade, nor with exile, but with forgetting. Rome had a word for this: Damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. It was not merely to destroy, but to unmake. To strip a soul from history so completely that even the gods could not find it. It was the empire's most elegant cruelty, a punishment that left no scars, only silence. And yet silence has its own rebellion. Even as her image vanished from stone, her story lived in secret, carried by poets who dared to write her sin as allegory, by slaves who carved her initials into walls, by women who whispered her name in the dark as a warning or a prayer. In the grand archives of Rome, her space remained, a deliberate emptiness, a blank where memory once lived. Scholars centuries later would find it, that gap between lines, and wonder, who was erased so thoroughly and why? Her night of defiance lasted only hours, her erasure centuries, but memory has a strange way of surviving, not in records, but in the things they try hardest to destroy. In Rome, sin wasn't punished for being evil. It was punished for being seen, and thus, the goddess became a ghost. Centuries passed. The empire that once ruled the world crumbled into dust, and the marble gods who had watched over it lay broken beneath the earth. Yet some stories refuse to die. They linger, buried, burned, waiting for the curious to unearth them. It began with a discovery beneath the ruins of a forgotten villa outside Rome. Archaeologists brushed away layers of ash and soil, uncovering a sealed chamber untouched since antiquity. Inside, amid shattered pottery and decayed scrolls, they found fragments, faint lines inked in Latin, words trembling on the edge of oblivion. At first, the writing seemed ordinary: household inventories, tax receipts, ceremonial notes. But deeper within the stack, a pattern emerged. A letter, a poem, a confession perhaps. The ink had nearly vanished, but a few sentences endured. Whispers from another life. The goddess who took the night for herself. One line read. Another mentioned 20 men summoned beneath torches. The scholars exchanged uneasy glances. They knew this was no ordinary text. In dimly lit archives, historians began to compare fragments from across the empire, from a charred scroll in Alexandria, a mosaic inscription in Herculaneum, a broken statue base in Carthage. Each hinted at the same story. The night an empress defied her emperor, her gods, and her fate. But every account ended abruptly, as if someone had sliced history mid-sentence. Rome had not simply destroyed her name, it had rewritten the world around it. The empire's chroniclers were architects of illusion, polishing history until it gleamed. They erased rebellion, edited desire, purified corruption. And yet, no matter how thoroughly they cleansed the record, the stain remained, faint but indelible. One historian, writing in the late Renaissance, described discovering a hidden codex in a monastery library. Its pages smelled of smoke. Its Latin was fractured, translated from an older tongue. In the margins, a trembling hand had written, "She made Rome tremble without raising a sword." He never published the full text. Days later, the manuscript was reported missing. Others followed, tracing the legend through rumor and ruin. An endless pursuit of a truth that refused to stand still. Was it myth? Was it propaganda? Or had one woman truly dared to use her body as her crown, her defiance as scripture? By candlelight, modern translators still pore over the fragments. The ink fades a little more each year, as if the words themselves resist resurrection. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the lights of Rome flicker across the Tiber, those who study the ruins swear they can feel something. A pulse beneath the marble, a whisper beneath the dust. Perhaps history has forgotten her name. Perhaps that was the point. But the walls of Rome still remember. History doesn't remember her name, but the walls of Rome still whisper it. Empires have always feared the same kind of woman, not the meek, nor the monstrous, but the one who learns how to turn her chains into a crown. Rome was the first to perfect the art of silencing her, but it would not be the last. For every empress condemned to oblivion, history would birth another who refused to kneel. The Roman Empress's name may have been chiseled from stone, but her story seeped into the cracks, immortal through rumor, reborn in every tale of a woman punished for being too powerful, too visible, too free. Centuries later, her legend echoes in queens accused of vanity, in actresses labeled scandalous, in leaders called dangerous for commanding more than admiration. The stage changes, the costumes evolve, but the performance remains the same. A world trembling before the sight of a woman who owns her desire without apology. Rome thought it was purging a sin. Instead, it created a symbol. Her erased face became every face that followed. From Cleopatra's fatal allure to Marie Antoinette's theatrical defiance. From the courtesans of Versailles to the stars of modern screens who understand that scandal is simply another form of sovereignty. The Empress's act was not the end of her legacy. It was the seed of an eternal pattern. The forbidden truth that power and pleasure, when fused, can unmake empires. Even today, her ghost lingers in our obsession with those who blur the line between virtue and defiance. We build them up like goddesses, then destroy them when they refuse to stay divine. Just as Rome did, we write them out of the story, only to find them haunting the margins, their silence louder than any sermon. What the Empress understood, and what Rome never forgave, was that control is not granted, it's taken. She ruled not with armies or decrees, but with presence. In a world where men claimed the right to define her, she defined herself in a single, irreversible act. For one night, she turned shame into strategy, submission into dominance, and sin into scripture. And though her name is gone, her shadow remains, lingering in the corridors of power, where whispers still rise when a woman dares to rule her own body, her own image, her own story. In the city that conquered the world, one woman conquered its silence for one night.